not really very well versed in basketball. I had to ask my brother a lot, but I really enjoyed it. So the first question that I have, what was the casting process like?
So pretty much, pretty much the casting process. I wrote the film while I was still here in school, so I wasn't able to really meet people in person. So I was just reaching out on Instagram to different actors. I kind of went on Backstage and then would find the names in the area of St. Pete or closest to Miami, and then I would look up their Instagrams and then just send them a random DM saying, hey, introducing myself, saying what my name was, a little bit of my experience, and then what the film was going to be about, and just trying to see what experience they had, what type of skills they bring, and then pretty much just hoping that someone would join into it.
All right. And what was the inspiration for the script? Was it a certain point in your basketball career? Was there a certain encounter that you had? What exactly prompted you to make this type of story?
So I have a little brother who also plays basketball, and I think people who have siblings, you fight a lot, you have fun, So pretty much I trained my little brother in basketball whenever I'm back home in the summer or whenever I wasn't here at school, and we get into a lot of arguments over different things, different skill sets, and I feel like since he's 16 years old and I'm 21, we both come from different types of walks of life, where it's I'm more probably take it on the chin, to keep on going. You gotta push through no matter what. Whereas you kind of not the baby someone younger, but you have to know that you're from a different generation. He's from a generation where some people might say that you're not used to you're just giving handouts pretty much. Where I'm from a generation where I feel like I have to work for everything, and I feel like being a first generation college student played a big factor in okay, my mentality approaching it, and I just feel when I look at him, I want to be the best he can be, and I know that sometimes arguments, you say things you don't mean, and then it's okay, an hour later you're back cool. So that's kind of where the idea came from.
Okay. And I know that this started life as a short, but do you have any plans to expand it into a feature-length film someday?
No, I don't really have any plans. It was just I wanted to make it as a short film, just as my first time saying I wanted to push myself to make sure I actually made something. I didn't want to just keep writing it and say oh well, one day I'll make something whenever I have the time or I have the money. I told myself no matter what I write during this semester, I have to film when I go back home.
Yeah, Daniel.
All right. And what was the most challenging part of the production?
I think I'd probably say the most challenging part was so we filmed it in 2 days, and it's a pretty small cast and crew. Pretty much everyone helped out. It was me, the DP, who also color graded, and then we had my friend Brian Diaz, who's a PA, and then we had the 2 actors and my little brother pretty much helping out. And since it was in 2 days, we had a lot of places to go to. We had to go to a gym to film the inside scenes. We had to go to an outdoor court to film the scenes. And we had to film some at nighttime, also film some during the day. And then we had to also go to the pier and film the scenes where he's talking on the phone and also to his brother at the end. So I think moving around, trying to get it done in 2 days makes it the hardest part, because you just have 2 cars trying to head to one spot, head to the next spot, and trying to also race against the sun. We don't want to lose any time. I'm also not trying to go over 12 hours, keeping everybody nice and fed. So I think that was probably the hardest part, just the time constraint.
I have one more question, and then we'll turn it over to the audience. So after this experience making this short film and writing it, what would you say is the most valuable lesson that you took away that you will carry with you later on into your filmmaking career?
I think the most valuable lesson I learned was a lot of people say when they're writing that you shouldn't let your budget or time constrain you when you're actually writing, and then worry about that later. And I think that's really what made me more focus more on the story. I sat here and I was like, okay, well, when I wrote the story, I didn't know how much money I was going to have to film it. I knew I was going to try to do a crowdfund, and wherever money I have, while working jobs, I was going to save up. But I pretty much was this story is going to be wherever it is. When I'm done writing it, wherever I can settle for, I'll take. But I knew that if I have a strong story, the plot's there, and at least the characters are believable and realistic, then it won't really matter what the budget or the time constraint is. It will come out as a good product.
All right, and we'll open up questions to anyone in the audience that has something they'd like to ask.
What did you take from the screenwriting internship that you learned on set of your husband was a good man and to check up?
So, being a second AD, I got to learn a lot of skills, especially from our first AD, Lindsay. I never knew how to make call sheets or how to make script sides, so those are things where, we're on a more professional set where I decided, okay, I want to bring that to my set, even if it's not necessarily a big cast and crew. Like, I wanted to make sure that even if it's just 5 of us, opposed to if there was 20 of us, everything would still be run professional. And that's pretty much like the biggest lesson I took, making sure to keep everything smooth and just being a nice person, because, kindness is always going to be rewarded.
I can just yell.
No, me.
Pass it down, that's
Pass it down.
You laugh at my dead husband, y'all have
I
to.
did.
Hey Daniel, Connor Mahudi, I'm on the basketball team with you. First of all, I'm a huge fan, I just want to say. Second of all, were there any scenes that were like improvised or went past the script that you didn't originally intend?
Yeah, so there's a scene where they're arguing in the kitchen, which is right before the 1v1, and pretty much like we decided when we were storyboarding, we had like 4 different shots, mainly different angles that we were going to use, and we set up that first angle, and they pretty much did it like in 6 takes. Where on that 6th take, that was the best one we used, and I decided like it looked perfect to me. I liked what we were using, and I was like, okay, well, there's no we have time, we need to keep going, so I decided to go with that shot, and they pretty much went through all of that. They messed up the lines like halfway through, but we didn't want to stop them because we knew we were on time constraints, and it turned out good for me.
Do you have a question?
That's on. Hey, Dan.
Hi.
When will we get a part 2?
There probably won't be a part 2. It'll just be like a one-time thing.
Can I get an autograph?
Yeah.
I have 2 questions. The first one's about when they're doing the matchup about halfway through for where he's going. There's like a really long take where they're both scoring. How long did it take for you to get that right, or did you need to do more than 1 take?
So originally, like, I already knew they didn't have like the best basketball skill set, so I wanted to like try to like choreograph everything possible. But my cinematographer Kristen, at like one point after we were there, and it was probably like 9 o'clock-ish that we got to the court, and it's like, sun's already down, so we can actually film the nighttime one-on-one. He said, like, do you think that trying to force basketball players to play basketball might tire them out? And I was like, that's a good point. Like, if we sit here and try to like waste time trying to make it look more believable or like make it more simple to fit their needs but also fit the needs of the story, we might end up just wasting more time overall. So we decided pretty much to say, you know what, play one-on-one. Like, it's not, because I already knew it was going to be like about a 2 or 3 minute scene out of a 22-minute short, so I was like, this shouldn't be the main takeaway, just watching them play 1v1. There's still more story to actually tell. And I mean, it turned out pretty good just because the minute we finished their 1v1, the lights had went off at the court at like 11 o'clock. So it was like perfect timing that we ended up finishing it.
Nice. Same questions about the music. There was like some instrumental and then some words. Like, where'd you get it?
So I had a friend, he goes to NYU for composing, and he did the opening like 30-second instrumental. And I had just always I had known him for about the past 2 years. We met on Discord, so it was kind of crazy. But for the rest of it, it was pretty much just like using royalty-free music and trying to fit it where it could, because I wanted to save money. That was the main thing. Like, I'm a cheap college student, so I didn't want to try to look for a composer who maybe might be charging too much. And he was just doing me a favor, and I didn't want to overstep and ask for too much.
Nice.
I don't need the mic, darling, you're okay.
No.
I got it, you're okay. I really don't want to speak into the microphone. I'm okay. Okay, I'm going to ask you. How much overall do you think it cost? Was it above budget? around the budget you wanted to spend?
So I wanted to like hopefully raise around $2,000 to ideally to have everything that I needed. That was like trying to have a bigger cast, a bigger crew, different actors that I hadn't been looking at first. But I didn't raise enough money, and like most of it was self-funded. So I ended up using about $700 to $800 to get it all done. Most of it went to like the Airbnb, which I got for 3 days just because most of the people were coming from the Miami area. It's about 4 hours away from St. Pete where I live. So I kind of got like a halfway point, tried to make sure they could get there on time, but also I didn't want people driving after like 2 days of straight shooting just to drive back to Miami. Like I wanted to make sure they were safe, at least had the option to stay an extra night they needed. So that was about like 300 to 400, and then I used like another 200, 300 for food, and then the rest was pretty much, they had equipment they were bringing, I had equipment of my own, and then we used about $100 to get like a lens rental.
Your stuff on my mic.
Hey Daniel, Connor, I'm on the basketball team with you. You know, huge fan. But my question is so how big of a gap do you think is going to be, like, I wouldn't say skill-wise, but production and quality-wise from this one to your next one? And like, what's the biggest thing that you learned from it, from doing this one?
So my next one hopefully will be Modernity, which we wrote during our screenwriting internship. That story is more of like a psychological horror, and since that really doesn't, it requires more skills of acting and just has a lot more technical based things, I believe, and especially like plot driven. I won't have to really worry about like, oh, I need an actor who can make a 3-point shot or can dunk the ball or can do dribbling skills. So I think it will be a lot more professional in that sense. And I also have now a short film under my belt where I learned from that, like knowing how to talk to actors, knowing how to work with people, knowing how to work on a 2-day time constraint where I can also now take what I learned from that, plan next time for the next film, maybe make it a longer schedule or know what I can and can't do in 2 days and what I can sacrifice from out the story. It just an overall experience that like lets me work on the script better and make it better to show on film.
Daniel, I have a question for you. So, and this is like curiosity for me. So, are you like a writer of stories and then translated some of that skill set into the screenwriting? What's the difference between writing just like for writing purposes versus translating that or writing for a screenplay specifically? What's the difference between the two?
So I like originally before coming to college, I even like when I was in high school, I went to this high school that was pretty much like it had a medical magnet program. So I never had plans to even be like an English major. I wanted to be a heart surgeon. And once I got into films, like my family had always showed me movies. Always, my mom, she went to college but she didn't graduate. She was a journalism major. So like I always had like writing in my background for my family. But when I decided to become an English major and decided to do more writing, I was like, okay, well, what type of writing do I want to do? Like, and the first thing that came to my mind was I would love to write movies. Like that's like my favorite thing. That's what my family loves to do. Like watch movies together. So I sat here and like was just on YouTube a bunch of times before coming to school. Like, okay, how to write a screenplay. Like looking up that type of stuff. Looking up how to build characters outside of what they teach you in high school. You know, like the basic plot elements. And it got to a point where I was like, okay, this is what I really want to do with my life. So when I came here, they obviously didn't have like a screenwriting like program, and I knew about that. And I was like, okay, well, I'll be an English major. Like that's close enough. I can also work on my writing. At the same time, I had like one of the films that inspired me to become a filmmaker is this movie called Inception, and the person who made it is Christopher Nolan. And during his interviews, I learned that he went to college because his parents forced him to, and he decided just to be an English major because he said, well, hey, if I'm gonna go to school, I'll just do writing, even though they don't have the writing that I want. So that was pretty much what made me decide to be an English major. And then getting to like writing research papers, that taught me how to actually research the right elements to what I want in a story. Like for example, with the Modernity screenplay, I would go to the library like last semester. I read like books on witchcraft and all that because it involves witchcraft. And I was like, okay, well, let me actually research what I'm talking about. Let me try to make it as realistic as possible because I don't want to just build a fake world that wherever I say goes and that's how it is. Because then I feel like it's not really as believable. So I think I've learned a lot of research skills up from these past 4 years that have allowed me to make stronger stories and make more believable characters. And that's how I try to translate it to the characters that I write. Try to make them believable, try to make them like everyday people, and just ask a question of what would happen if your brother, the person you love, is the one causing you the most harm.
Thank you.
And I have just one more question, since I thought maybe people would ask, but they didn't. So, I noticed when I first saw your short that it has over 30,000 views on YouTube. Did that, was that your expectation when you set out to do it, or how did you feel whenever you hit that milestone of views?
When I posted it like on YouTube, I was just posting it to show the people that I know, like my followers, my friends, my family, just to have it out there. I kind of knew I wasn't going to put it in festivals just because I was like, it's my first one. Like, I feel like I achieved what I wanted to do by making it and actually having a finished film and then being able to put it out. And then like the first week is on there, like it was like only like 100 views, 200, and I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like people are seeing it, that makes me happy, and I didn't think twice about it. And then like a couple days later, someone had asked me like, oh, how many views is that? And I'm like, oh, it's at like 200, I think 300. And then like the next morning I woke up, it was at like 1,000. And then I was like, whoa, like that's kind of crazy. But I'm like, okay, that's how YouTube works. Like people see stuff. I mean, it's not a big deal. And then like the next day it went to like 2,000. It kept going up, and I was like, oh, it was kind of like a sense of like enjoyment because I was happy that people were actually being able to see it, and I didn't even expect not even 1,000 people to see it, like not really 500. So being able to see that, knowing that like my hard work was validated in some way, it was a nice experience.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. It was a wonderful short. Thank you so much for your time.
I would like to welcome to the stage with me Petra Mulligan, our SFX artist, John Mulligan, our editor, and Emily Fabrizio, our executive producer, and jack of all trades. She did like 5 billion things.
All right, so now we'll move on to the portion where we discuss your husband was a good man. The first question that I always like to lead with is about inspiration. What would you say is your inspiration for this short?
No.
That is valid.
No. Part of my inspiration for this was a very unique grief that came upon me after making my first feature, Bystanders, like in the aftermath of that, and also in 2020 when my grandmother passed away, and I had already been dealing with, grief from that. So I was just, a lot of grief had compounded and was finally being expelled all at once, and I had already had this idea, and I felt just completely emotionally and spiritually and professionally depleted at that point. And then I was like, okay, I'm giving it a shot. Let's see if I have anything left in me. And I did. So.
All right. And one thing that stands out to me about this film is the soundtrack. If I were to describe it in a few short words, constant, almost droning at times, plodding, filled with dread. Did you always have this thought that you wanted this type of soundtrack, or did you have another style of music planned?
No, I always knew that I wanted to have that kind of eerie, almost discordant synth sort of soundtrack that just kind of just ate away at you, and it was a happy accident almost that our composer literally just kept that up throughout the whole thing. And then we took advantage of that to have that wonderful just quiet at the end and let everybody just sit with what they just seen. So
Yeah, that sudden cut of the music and then just that haunting silence before the crying starts back up is effective. So that actually played into my next question, was whether that was always planned.
No, it just kind of happened while we were sitting there editing it, and then we were like, I just kind of like when the music cuts out and the baby's crying, and John and I were like, and then the silence is so eerie, and and then we were like, let's just leave it because it's so effective, and so yeah, that was a happy accident. And there's a lot of those that happens when you're just sitting there editing and trying to figure out what works.
Okay, these next couple questions I have actually are for each of you, so if you just want to pass the mic down with these next couple. The first is, what would you say was the most challenging part of the production for you?
Personally, casting Will. Casting Will almost killed me because I had written this role for a specific actor who could not portray Will. So then I was left trying to find somebody that could fill that void, ironically, in the story of grief. So luckily, Dee Gabbard just slotted right in there. He plays Brad in Bystanders, so we had already worked together, and we knew we could work together. We knew we had great antagonistic chemistry. We didn't know that we had great romantic chemistry, so we found out a lot on that set.
Oh, okay. I think so for me, editing it, probably the biggest challenge. And I found this with a lot of other like artistic mediums that I've done is sort of knowing when you're done, basically, because you can always sort of like refine it and you can like continually and you can like obsess about it and stuff, but just sort of like figuring out like when you're actually like done or when it's like good enough, basically, is probably the biggest challenge for me personally.
So I did special effects, and I came onto the production like 2.5 weeks before shooting started. Literally met Jamie 2.5 weeks before through a mutual friend. So that was challenging to come up with some practical effects in that amount of time. Probably most notably the neck rip, which I knew was going to be the most intensive part. So I had about 4 days to figure that out, and Jamie was super helpful in sourcing materials and giving feedback and everything, but not knowing how it was going to go beyond a few tests until the last night, literally the last scene, was very nerve-wracking.
I don't know how to answer. Well, Jamie was actually very stressed out about the whole Will casting situation. That was probably the most difficult for me. And Callie Kirk and I, and also Riley Norris, we decided, we're like, Jamie, just step away, we're gonna do this. And we started surfing through, like, we actually went to backstage as well and looked there. We had somebody, and Riley was actually like fielding like a lot of the emails. And this one guy had to drop out because he had a scheduling conflict. Then another guy wanted to bring on his girlfriend as Orla, because, and it was like, it's a casting call for just Will. But he was trying to shoe in his girlfriend, and it was weird, and, oh, God. But, yeah, so casting Will was weird, and I'd heard stuff about Deaton, and I was like, okay. But, no, that's probably the most difficult. We got everything done ahead of time, so it was pretty smooth sailing, like, during actual production, so.
Okay. And the next question that I have for everyone in the group is, what was your favorite scene to work on? Be that whether it was filming, editing, doing the effects, what was your favorite scene that you worked on?
I think my favorite scene, and it's really because everything just kind of come alive in that moment for me, is the ritual scene, because that was the end of night one. That was one of the last things that we did, and that's when it finally felt, like everything was going to fall into place, and it did, and that it just kind of became the capstone for me for that production. And yeah, that one that's when I knew it was gonna work completely.
So my favorite scene to work on was probably, I guess when he kills Sawyer in the, is the very last scene that we shot, and we were trying to get it done as quickly as we could. I feel like we didn't get a ton of coverage, so I was like interested to see, based on what we had, which was kind of limited, what I could do with it. I think it turned out pretty okay.
Yeah, that scene was definitely like the most adrenaline filled for me because we had 2 shots to get it because I had 2 rigs, period, and we were closing in on our deadline. But the actual funnest scene on set was when they're eating breakfast and he throws up the eggs because there's just something about it that always gets a reaction. And my wonderful assistant Tegan was there to help mop up the gross black goo every time, shout out. And he really went for it. He asked for eggs to be put into the vomit, which was actually marshmallows and chocolate syrup, so it was actually quite delicious. But he's method, so respect. But yeah, we did that several times, and it was pretty fun.
Actually, mine was egg vomit. It's my favorite too. It's been my favorite since like the first draft, because I just vividly pictured it. Yeah, so every time we watch it, I just like stare at it fondly, and I'm like, it's so gross. It's so cool though. So that's really it. What
Okay.
else can I say?
And it's funny that you answered about the previous question with the ritual, because the next one on the list is, what sources did you consult for the ritual?
My brain. I consulted nothing but the vibes that were deep within me for that one. Like, I was like, you know what? No, I'm not even gonna look up anything. I'm not like Daniel when it comes to the ritual stuff. I was like, I'm just gonna go and I'm gonna wing this completely, mostly because part of me is a little superstitious, and I was like, I don't want to mess with something accidentally, so I would rather just make up something of my own, because I was like, I'm not trying to like accidentally summon my dead husband that I don't have back from the dead. So
You don't want to preemptively bring back your dead
I
husband.
do not want to
understand.
preemptively bring back my dead husband.
Okay. One of the best visuals in the short film, I think, is the electrical flickering. I like that visual cue, and I noticed at first, after whenever the ritual happens, and Orla's looking around, we have the visual cue. As the short progresses, is that perceived by the characters throughout, or is that more for us as an audience that kind of cues us into things starting to go sideways?
It's more of an audience cue for me. That was brought on by our lovely cinematographer, Bino Bannon, who was like, yeah, what if we get a light flicker in there? And our gaffer, Marvin Watts, who I adore both of these guys, they killed it. And it is eerie, and it's even eerier in the color graded version. We don't have that assembled yet, because we all have day jobs and everything's busy, but it is something that really brings an extra artistic layer to the film.
And can you tell me a little more about the experience, with the students, with the internship? How did you go about assigning roles for the production?
So I've had all of these students in classes before, so it was actually the easiest thing ever was to assign them different roles, because I wanted to play to their specific strengths. Carmela was a script supervisor, bless her soul. Carmela has such a beautiful attention to detail, and I knew that is something that she would just absolutely excel at. Daniel was our second assistant director. Since he wanted to direct himself. I wanted to bring him in so he could learn more about ADing, so he could kind of use that as a path to, get closer and closer to directing, and learn more about being on a set. Sawyer was basically our second camera assistant, so he slated. Sawyer's very passionate about film, so I knew he would want to be right in there with everything, doing everything. Tegan is very artistic, so putting her with Petra and Emily was a given, and Riley just has wonderful management sense. So I was, actually she was promoted. She was just like a line producer and unit production manager, but we promoted her to executive producer before it was all said and done because she was killing it in every capacity.
All right, and then I have one final question. This is another one that'll be for each of you, and then we'll open the floor up to the audience for any additional questions. One thing that I believe, and I'm sure that you'll agree, even after having worked on multiple productions, I believe that you can take away a lesson from each production. So, for each of you, what would you say is your biggest takeaway or your biggest learning experience from this one? Be it being as a mentor to students, or just something that you will carry with you throughout the rest of your filmmaking career.
It's important to curate your cast and your crew as carefully as possible, because if you have one person and their intentions or their just overall persona is off, it will throw everything off. And I specifically very carefully curated this. I wanted everything to go as smoothly as possible, and it worked just beautifully, actually going in there and taking that time to think about it, giving myself that time in pre-production to figure out who would work best where, and that made all the difference.
I'd say one of my biggest takeaways was just the combination of the professionals that we worked with and the students and everybody. How well everything went and how smooth everything went and how high morale was the whole time. Because I've been on things where the wheels have completely fallen off and it's not been enjoyable. So this was definitely a good experience. I think everyone's hard work was, really shows. And
I agree with John. Going into it, I didn't know if it was going to be more of a student production. She had mentioned that she had hired crew and had worked with certain people before, but it was really like a perfect mix, and the students were all extremely enthusiastic and serious, which was awesome. And yeah, definitely been on worse productions. When everything's going around in production, it's super fun, and everyone's got that sense of like, yeah, we're all collaborating and doing something. When one person has a bad attitude and it spreads throughout a set, it's like, God, get me out of here. So this was definitely not one of those times. Personally, I think the thing I most took away from it was, if you're in charge of a certain aspect of filming, like special effects for me, it's your responsibility to talk to everyone involved, say the actors, the director, the writer, etc., and make sure they know exactly what you're going for, how everything works, everyone feels safe, which I already knew I needed to do, but just not being a part of pre-production for those crucial months before, being on set for those 3 days was like, okay, hey, I'm Petra, here's what we're doing. Just to make sure that everybody knew what was going on was very important, and you can't be afraid to do that.
So actually, it should be a given what I learned, and it was actually just having everything ready and completed on time, because my ADHD really keeps me from, staying on task. So, but I was actually, given a task, given deadlines, I was like, okay, boom, boom, boom. Everything went smooth sailing. It wasn't very confusing. the only mishap really was like Deaton wore the wrong costume for like 5 minutes and somebody caught it. So, I don't know. Yeah, having it all sorted out and prepared was about it.
All right, so now we'll open up the floor to questions from the audience.
What films would you say inspired you?
Obviously, and this is probably not shocking to anyone who has ever spent more than 10 minutes around me, I've spent like 98% of my life wanting to remake Pet Sematary. So Pet Sematary, the 80s version, was definitely a inspiration for me, as well as films like The Fly, the 1950s one, ironically, because it is about a husband and a wife, and she winds up having to kill her husband in that. And then there's also The Babadook, which is a beautiful film about grief. I took a little bit from Jennifer's Body, just grasping at a lot of weird places. The Night House was one of them. So there's a lot of like little elements from those. Black Mirror has a wonderful episode called Be Right Back that was an inspiration of mine. The film Annihilation, because I love the idea of you get what you wish for, but the person comes back wrong.
I think that we did too thorough of a job up here, don't we?
I would like to point out that in that scene when we kill Sawyer, there is a hidden cut in there, and you cannot tell it at all because it is during an action scene where Deaton's moving. There's a hidden cut in there, and you can't see it because John is that good of an editor. And I just wanted everybody to know that because recently people have been lauding a film that Shudder acquired that is one simulated long take, and you can tell exactly where the hidden cuts are. And I looked at Emily when we watched it, and I was like, their editor is not as good as John. And I was like, I felt very smug about that. So I wanted to take a second to brag on him. Also, there's like no other man that I would rather sit by and stare at me kissing Deaton Gabbard for like 2 hours trying to figure out how to cut a scene. And Petra is absolutely just fabulous, and she has just basically, she jumped right into it, and I could not ask for a better person to know, and I'm so glad that Courtney introduced us, and that was just, it was magic. That was magic. And of course, Emily, who literally fielded every insurance question that could have ever happened. We had some issues because you have to have insurance, as it turns out, when you are making a film. Yeah, because, you know, accidents happen, and not only are you insuring your actors, which is very important when you have someone like Deaton Gabbard on set, and I will tell you all about that, but first, the insurance. But you also have to insure your equipment when you're renting it, because that is very important, because like while I might have the money to make a short, I don't have the money to replace this expensive equipment, and they won't even let you rent it until you've shown them, hey, we have insurance. And our insurance agent, Travis A. Swain, was a saint, because when we had to field all these weird insurance questions, we didn't know the answer. we'd never done this before, so we had to send them to him. And then when you have someone like Deaton, who is a walking hazard, he is a talented actor, he's an enthusiastic actor, he is like a human wrecking ball. When we filmed Bystanders, he broke a door. And I looked at him on this one, and I said, if you break that door, I'm gonna kill you for real. He didn't break a door, but he wanted to actually like touch a raw steak and then touch the chunks of like soaked, like fake blood soaked pineapple that was the raw steak. And we were like, no, you will get E. coli or salmonella and you'll die. And Petra was just like, I can't deal with this right now. You will die. No. And then later on, when he was killing Sawyer, which I guess that's a fan favorite scene already, he goes to Petra and asks her if the nernies are edible. And a nerny is basically, this was ribbon that was covered in layers of latex to look like, you know, arteries and like sinew and gristle and stuff. It's really cool. We found some of those in our yard afterwards, and I put them in a shadow box for Petra. And he goes, can I eat these? Are these edible? And Petra's like, no.
I'm trying to eat everything.
Yes, he was trying to eat everything, and like, he is an amazing actor, but he is a prime example of why you need insurance on a production. And I'll tell you this, recently he broke like his elbow on a set, not too long ago. So I said, should have had us, we would have sat on him basically and said, no, you can't do that. So that's just a little more insight to what made this production tick. It was a lot of us sitting, telling Deaton, no, you can't eat that, and no, you can't do that.
All right, well, that looks like that wraps it up for the Q&A session. I'll turn it back over to Miss Alvey, and we will move on to the door prizes.